And that is, of course, takes a lot of time. If you had to add those pages to a physical book, the thing, you couldn't even get it through the door. You know, the Irish Origins book would just be impossible to mail to anyone. It would be like 2,000 pages long. It's already a box set. You know, my company couldn't find a box to put it in, you know, this kind of thing.
Yeah, well, what I was talking about is that, you know, it takes a lot of hard work and effort and a lot of research to write a book, and we get to read it within a couple of days or a couple of weeks, you know, and we get to absorb all that knowledge that researcher or that author took, you know, all that time and effort to write down and to research. It's just beautiful because we have to fall in love with knowledge, just like you say, and we get to absorb it within a few days, and I just find that very beautiful, you know.
And that was the plan with my books, especially, is to try and, especially the Irish Origins book, that research started back in a humble way in 1982 and picked up very strongly in about 85. And so my idea was to try and compress all the knowledge that I had read. I mean, literally 32 crates of books, Michael, 32 crates of books. I know because I have to haul these things physically, me and my friends and my brother, to so many apartments in America. It's not even funny. So I know exactly how many there are and what they contain. Since got rid of a lot of stuff, of course, but in those days it was just reading constantly, reading and reading and reading, and continuing to do that today. But the idea was to try and compress all of that into my work so that people don't have to spend that 30 years or whatever, you know, in going into these areas. And so it does take a long time. I mean, writing the Irish Origins book was a 2-year process from the time I got the idea to do it, and that was an accident, until the time it first came out in November of 2007. 2 solid years of almost like 14-hour days, you know, and my body was in a state of total disrepair afterwards. I mean, completely stiff, just sitting for hours and hours and hours and refusing to do anything else, and constant research, and just the toll it takes on your arms and your shoulders and body, you know, alone is devastating, you know. So it does take an awful lot of work and effort,
Back to some of the questions that I have down here. I don't believe that the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Freemasons, and other secret societies are the capstone of the control pyramid structure. Who or what is the capstone that is the driving force behind these groups?
Well, that's a very fascinating question, and that is, of course, takes to the heart of the Irish Origins book and Atlantis book. And I'd say that to take it in stages, you're quite right. Any of these individuals that you happen to see, especially in the public eye, you know, since the advent of television and radio, tend to be, not all the time, but tend to be quite low down, as a matter of fact. In fact, very low down in the vast majority of cases. A little bit further up, if you go back before the TV age, and you go back into the history books and you start seeing these Leopolds of Austria, and, you know, the Charles de Lorraines, various Habsburgs, various kings and potentates of the past, perhaps even some popes, you're going a little higher up the ladder because, of course, before the television cameras existed, these people, you know, were a little bit more well known, and you can their faces do appear in the history books. They weren't as camera shy because there simply wasn't any cameras. So, you know, certain potentates, you know, Constantine, if you want to take it back through the Christian era, you know, the Theodosiuses. There's been all sorts of characters who have been very, very high up the ladder as you go further back. And as you start tracking this particular ideological and physical bloodline backwards, and of course many scholars do this and come up with different ideas, of course. In my research, I came across the figure basically of Akhenaten, the very, you know, infamous pharaoh of Egypt back about 1400 years BC. And although he himself wasn't the supreme highest, he was about as far up the pyramid as you're going to get when it comes to photogenics. When it comes to the fact that here we have a definable character whose face and visage is in the history books, the sculptures have been made, and then later on in life, and perhaps even before him, that's the same kind of concept. You're talking about pharaohs, you're talking about a certain group of powerful people that belong to what William Bramley referred to as the Brotherhood of the Snake. It's also referred to as the Dragon Court. You're talking about this dynasty of people who I very much believe have the alien blood that I spoke about in the Atlantis book. And it's their descendants, both in a physical, biological state, and also in a ideological context, that then rule the world. And therefore, highest up the pyramid, then from there on would be various peoples in the Habsburgs, the Hanoverians, many of the people from known as the Black Venetians, even though they tend to be a little bit lower down. But certainly the Queen Victorias, the present Queen of England. There is a dispute going on about whether or not her side of the family is actually legitimate. You know, they may have come in from the left wing. They were royal, but they may have usurped the actual throne of Britain. You know, these kinds of points are important, but they're not ultimately important, because remember, we're talking about a network of royals. So even if one family sort of got usurped or died out, and another one who's less legitimate got in there, it's really unimportant, because we're still talking Plantagenets, we're still talking Tudors, and as I said before, the time of the advent of modern media, when you are talking about these Edward Longshanks, and you're talking about these various, like William I, the famous Lionheart, and these types of people that we would, why are we calling them kings and queens? Where did they come from? We take it so obviously, like, oh, they're aristocracy, they're royalty. Yes, but where did that concept come from? Who are these people? What gave them the right? Why do they talk about, the divine right of kings? Who was James II? Who was Edward I? You know, who was the Duke of Champagne? Exactly. You know, who was these Knights Templar Merovingian people? Because remember, all the Knights Templars of France. This is Hugh de Payens and the Duke de Champagne, and all of these top people were members of a very powerful royal dynasty known as the Merovingian dynasty, that itself goes back to the Sicambrian Franks, who are German, and then through the German they go back to the Teutons, and through the Teutons you can track them all the way back to Egypt. So there's this Egyptian line, there's this what's called Judaic line, which is not the same thing as anything to do with modern religious Judaism, by the way, but it's known as a Judite line, coming from a different rendering of that word, you see. Yeah. David Livingstone, is another scholar, has picked up this whole movement through the Islamic Brotherhood, through the north, moving through Armenia. And basically the term that I've used for this Cabal, the highest of the Cabal, is Atomists. And that has to do with one of the gods that they worshipped, or one of the primary gods that they worshipped, was called Aton. And that, in fact, is Aton in another rendering, is the same as the Hebrew Jewish term Adonai, which is a stand-in for the word Jehovah. So they're actually Yahwists. These are another school of people who come and go, yeah, we know about them. They're the Yahwists, and they would be right in a way, because Yahweh was a composite god, very ancient composite god, that is basically a sort of a disguised version of Aton, the god of Akhenaton, and the god of this dragon court. So again, all these pieces tie in. And I didn't have an agenda when I was researching all of this, you see, and I'm not there to bash anybody's religious beliefs, as long as those beliefs are individual to them. But I certainly am there to implicate these institutions of tyranny and these institutions of mass genocide and death. Yeah, I'm surely going to want to expose those, and that's what I've been doing in my life, to find out what are their belief systems, why have they got an outer court for the average person, and why have they got an inner court reserved for, teachings reserved for initiates. What's that all about? So I've been trying to peer over the wall, and sort of look through the keyhole and try to do as much research to be up to speed on some of these more shadowy occult doctrines, which are very important to know about, because those are for the inner sanctum, and those are the initiates that then run the world. And then through those core groups, you have the von Taxis family, and you have all of these other groups you see that move out and start controlling the media, the rock and roll groups, the various religions, the spiritualist groups of the world, even the legal and medical professions, although my focus is more on the media, how they control the media. In fact, we're doing a whole thing on that in this latest talk, Age of Manipulation. And in the Origins and Oracle series, I dealt with that. I've been studying that for about 20, 30 years as well, this whole concept of how through the media they're able to purvey. Because there's a strange quirk. Don't ask me why they do it, but there's some strange quirk that you can define these groups and their agendas by the symbolism that they use. And bizarrely, they tend to use this symbolism right in plain view. And so by a symbolic literacy, by decoding these sacred symbols and these not-so-sacred symbols that they use, you can actually identify the face behind the curtain, because they use these symbols ubiquitously throughout our world. And these symbols actually there's a language of them. They mean something.
It doesn't matter if those symbols and all this occult stuff that they do is actually true. The thing is that they believe it is,
Exactly.
I try to stay interactive with my chat room, and then this is a